A New York State Supreme Court judge has thrown out the city of Albany's good cause eviction law. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it has to do with good cause eviction laws up in the state of New York. Now, as I've told you before, good cause eviction laws are basically a direct response to the whole eviction moratorium thing, right? What they want to do is they want to make it impossible for landlords to evict anyone for any reason. And at the same time, what they're trying to do is impose rent control laws through a kind of a backdoor provision within these good cause eviction laws. So what they do is they say, hey, landlords can only evict tenants for this small, specific number of reasons, right? And in their reasoning, you can't just allow your lease to expire. So if you put a tenant in your property on a 1-year lease, right, and that 1 year is up, you just can't say, well, I'm not going to renew the lease. No, you have to keep that tenant in there as long as that tenant wants to stay. So you lose control of your property if you do this, right? But they threw in there this rent control provision, right? And this is the way the rent control works, right? If you raise your rent above a certain percentage amount, then that is considered as like an eviction, right? And so, like if you say to you, well, I want to raise the rents in this unit 10%, right? And it's $1,000 a month. Well, according to the law, right, that you're actually going against their eviction law, by trying to force them out by raising your rents too much. So you can't do that. And that tenant can't be evicted, and they only have to pay the amount they choose to pay. So basically, it's a backdoor rent control, it's a backdoor eviction moratorium, and it would basically take property rights away from landlords. So the city of Albany was one of the first, large municipalities in the state to pass this ridiculous law. And guess what? It just got thrown out by a state Supreme Court judge, and I'm happy about that, okay? I can't tell you that these sort of laws, they are just absolutely awful for landlords, and especially with the sort of rent control provisions that are inputted into them. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? Now, I was pretty shocked when I saw that the state of New York didn't pass a statewide eviction law, but what do you think of these sort of good cause eviction laws, okay? I ask this every time I do a video on the topic, but I'm just curious, okay? Do you support such a thing or do you not support it? Okay. And the reason I ask is because I've had a lot more tenants who watch my videos lately, and maybe one of them can explain to me why it's a good thing. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't claim to be 100% expert on everything, but I do understand the landlord business. And I know that putting ridiculous laws, rules, and regulations on top of landlords only causes rents to increase, housing supply to decrease, and it to be worse for both the landlords and the tenants, okay? Anyway, let's get into this article. It's coming from WNBF.com, and it says, New York judge hands landlords a big legal win. Hey, you know what? It's great that every once in a while, landlords actually win, even in the state of New York. Rare, but it's great. Anyway, let's get into it. Per Lucas Willard of WAMC Northeast Public Radio, a New York State Supreme Court judge has struck down Albany's good cause eviction law, handing New York landlords a massive win. The good cause eviction law would have made it exceptionally more difficult for landlords to evict tenants. The law also would have prevented landlords from raising rents by more than 5% per year. So yeah, like I said, they put a backdoor rent control into it, right? And 5% per year. So on $1,000 a month rent, you couldn't raise it more than $50 in a year. And it would be a huge burden, especially on the mom and pops, because guess what? These good cause eviction protections, they don't just cover large apartment buildings. They will cover every single family home, spare bedrooms in people's homes, etc. Okay, so all the small landlords who previously didn't have to deal with all of the rent control provisions and stuff that was going on in New York, well, guess what? Now they have to. So yeah, it's a good thing this judge threw this out, because that sounds like a huge burden, especially for people who had their properties under rented. They were renting them for less than market value, and then they decide, hey, I need to bring these rents up to, closer to market value, and that was a greater than 5% increase. In the decision, Judge Christina Ryba deemed the necessity of good cause and grounds for removal of tenants in Local Law F to be in direct violation of New York state law. The grounds for removal of the tenant section stated in part that tenants could be evicted for not paying rent, provided, however, that the rent due and owing or any part thereof did not result from a rent increase or pattern of rent increases. While this left the door open for landlords to pursue eviction if a tenant stopped paying rent, it didn't allow them much room to rent their apartment at the best rate the market allowed for, because as written, even if a tenant consented to a rent increase, the court would be the judge of whether that rent increase, among a number of other factors, was fair and eviction proceedings could move forward. Yeah, so the court would agree to, that basically bureaucrats and government would be the ones who decide whether a rent increase is fair or not. This is my whole problem with rent control in general, okay? It doesn't matter what expenses the landlord has. It doesn't matter what their costs are, what their accounting is. The government sets the price for the rental, and that's wrong, okay? It is 100% wrong. On top of that, the whole point of rent control was supposed to be to create affordable housing for those who need it. Yet, as I've mentioned before, it's not means tested, which means that people who don't need affordable housing, people who make high incomes, they are still protected by this rent control. So what you have is, in a place like New York City, you'll have people who make, six figures, $500,000 a year living in rent controlled units. That is ridiculous. That is stupid, and it makes no sense. Instead of people, who actually need the affordable housing being the only ones who are able to access it, we have, doctors and lawyers and, investment bankers, etc., who are all, benefiting from rent controlled apartments, and this is, it's ridiculous, okay? And of course, the other thing being that, hey, people are still subletting, the apartments out so that they can make money off of the backs of their landlords. Plus, when you implement a rent control policy in like a city, like in the case of this story here, where this good cause eviction was only within the city of Albany, well, guess what's going to happen, okay? Albany has a whole bunch of suburbs surrounding it, just like every major city across the country. So people will, if they're not able to find an apartment, because housing will become scarce within the city of Albany, but that will cause the pricing outside of the city of Albany to increase. Okay? So that means that housing will become less affordable for the metropolitan area as a whole. And not only that, but, the developers, the real estate investors, the people who usually would provide more housing within the city, they're not going to do it. Why would they? Okay, there's no benefit for me as a landlord to suddenly say, hey, the city of Albany has rent control and these ridiculous eviction protections in place, right? So I'm going to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars buying property there, or I can go to this city that's right next to Albany that has none of that garbage and buy a house there and rent it out for full market value, raise the rents as I see fit, and the tenants don't have those ridiculous protections. Hey, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to move right over there, right to that city right next door, okay? And, that's what the developers are going to do. That's what, landlords like me are going to do. And, it is what it is. But they don't seem to understand that when they pass these laws, when they pass these rules, when they pass these regulations, that, hey, you cannot force landlords to comply. Okay, you cannot. Okay, the only thing you can do is hope that maybe landlords are willing to play your game, but hey, we don't have to continue to invest the way you think we should. Judge Ryba also determined that since the law was not related to the emergency rent control laws put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not subject to the emergency powers granted during the pandemic to prevent evictions. And without coverage under those emergency rent control measures, the good cause eviction law was found to create an unfair impediment to landlords operating in a free market and looking to the courts to evict tenants. Yeah, I mean, this is a sound decision by this judge, okay? This judge, I mean, wrote it right there. It's an unfair impediment to landlords, and landlords operating in a free market. That's what this country is, okay? Now, I know that there's a lot of socialists out there who think that it should be run otherwise, but you know what? That's not the way things are. And if you don't like it, you just move on over to Venezuela or, communist China or somewhere else where there isn't a free market and tell me what you think of how things are there.